Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are discussing the economic crisis in Europe. Europe has seen a growth in unemployment, and despite spending cuts and bailout packages, the economy is not picking up. To discuss the consequences of the continuing crisis in Europe, I have with me a very distinguished panel. I have with me Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. He is Professor of European Studies at Center for European Studies at JNU's School of International Studies. And we have Professor Ashok Desai, eminent economist, newspaper columnist, former chief economic advisor to Government of India, and also my old teacher and a friend. And we have Professor Manoj Pant. He's a trade expert. He's chairman of the Center for International Trade, a School of International Studies, JNU. Welcome all of you to this conversation. Dr. Desai, let me begin with you. What are the factors that have led to this European economic crisis? Is it a standalone crisis, or is it part of the crisis which began in America with the mortgage crisis in 2007, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and then the crisis moved to Europe?
In my view, it is a part of the world crisis, and the world crisis is due to a general shortage of growth. There is hardly any growth, especially in industrial countries. The only major countries which are growing are India and China, and European Union is suffering from this. And growth in economics results from innovation. So this is also a shortage of innovation. Innovation waves have stopped for the present in the world, and that is what is leading to almost zero growth and rising unemployment.
But why did the crisis begin in the US, and how did it move to Europe? What were the linkages?
The US has a freer capital market which rewards success and punishes failure. So failure was punished earlier in America, and then it spread to the EU because EU is America's biggest trading partner.
Okay. Professor Sachdeva, let me ask you this. The spring economic forecast of the EU says that the gross domestic product in the 17 Eurozone countries will shrink by 0.4%. And in the wider 27 country EU, the economy is expected to shrink by 0.1% in 2013. So how difficult is it going to be for Europe to recover?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, see, now what has happened in the last 3 years now, when all these countries, when they joined the Eurozone, all of them basically fulfilled convergence criteria, which was basically sound fiscal, your low fiscal deficit, low interest rates and everything else. But after that, all of them flouted all the rules. So as a result, later on for the first 2 years, most of them actually policymakers in Europe, they were in denial mode. What they were saying that the crisis is there somewhere in the smaller economy like Greece and others, which they can easily handle. But what now they have really realized that the basic problem is that you cannot have a single monetary policy and 27 fiscal policies. So as a result, this they have just started saying this in the last 1 year. So as a result, now what they're talking, kind of a common banking union, common euro bonds and other things. But many of those are political questions which they have to really come out with those answers.
But financially also, there were no mechanisms put in place for monitoring monetary policy and for prevention of crisis.
Because for first 10 years actually it worked very well. So they thought this is actually it's going well. But now only they have started realizing that this is not working. So since it was working well, and particularly in the countries which countries are facing problem, they were doing very well in the first 7-8 years. So it was benefiting everybody, it was benefiting investors, it was benefiting governments because the growth was coming, money was flowing into those countries. But only thing which happened later on when there was a crisis in the US, all financial institutions became more cautious, and then the numbers were wrong in Greece and all these kind of things which stories came out. And then the confidence eroded. Once the confidence eroded, money stopped coming into those countries. And then they have to need certain bailout packages. And then there was no provision. There was no institutional mechanism because they never realized that this is the kind of problem it's going to face. So now they are in the last 2 years, they are trying to build all those institutional mechanisms, whether Financial Stability Fund and all other issues. But they also have to rope in now IMF because within the Lisbon Treaty, there was no possibility of any bailout package. So now there's more intervention by the European Central Bank. So now, slowly and slowly they are learning how to deal with this kind of crisis, but the crisis is very serious because traditionally what you deal with this kind of situation, it's not that this kind of sovereign debt crisis has happened only in Europe or in Greece or many other countries. It's happened much before in so many other countries. So in those kind of situation, you go with all the tight fiscal and monetary policies, and then with the devaluate your currency. But those things, those options were not available for them. So as a result, now they are. I think my assessment is they are preparing themselves for some kind of possibility that maybe one or two smaller countries can perhaps go out of Eurozone, and then but how the system is going to cope with that. Yeah. So you have to have certain kind of firewall, with your banks and other things and credit security.
We'll discuss this in greater
else.
detail
Okay.
in the subsequent section. Professor Pant, the policies that the EU countries have used of spending cuts and increasing taxes, are they working to reduce deficits, or could they be counterproductive? Because if your economy shrinks, so does your tax revenue.
See, we'll have to go back to the first question you said, why did all this start? And let me, Ashok's given the point, he's right, starts the US. But the problem happens is, what happens when a world globalizes, countries integrate, but you have many systems, and then the systemic clashes. So you have the US is very open system, you penalize failure and you
Reward
success. Then you have the European system, where you actually reward success, but you don't penalize failure, because they have the system of fixed wages. In France, at least I knew, at least way back in 2012, it was more beneficial for a young executive to stay on the pension than to be enrolled as a junior executive in a firm. So they did not penalize failure. And then you have the system, let's take the Asian system, which worked well, not because the best, but because we had no other option, was you don't penalize success too much, you don't reward failure. You don't penalize failure too much, don't reward success.
No, but will austerity spur growth? That is my question.
No, it will not. And that reason for that is the following, that the essential problem, as Ashok mentioned, is the lack of demand in US. Now notice, when you say it's a European crisis, not a crisis for everyone. It's only Greece and small economies like Cyprus, which are there, which is of course there. Then of course you have possible France, Germany, no problems. So it's like saying...
But German growth is also...
no, but Germany has no serious unemployment problem like the others. Okay. Only the French are getting there, the Spanish are hitting 20-22%. Okay. So as I said, it's a crisis within the EU that their attempt to become a single economy, are they willing to do that? And then comes all the other issues of Gulshan.
Okay, we will come to that. We'll take a short break at this juncture. We'll continue with this discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the crisis in Europe. Professor Pant, I interrupted you before we went on the break. So tell me, you were saying that the crisis is not affecting all the countries equally, but the austerity measures are affecting even the prosperous countries. Correct. As I said, Germany's growth is going to decline from 0.7% to 0.4%.
Correct.
France also is going into the negative territory.
Correct.
So, how do you get out of this situation?
No, see, first of all,
it can't be that the smaller countries can either be thrown out of EU or they get out of it, and the bigger countries of the north, they can sustain
as I said,
somehow.
The whole, there's a certain amount of politics which one has to mention. The whole formation of the EU was two things. On one, an economic response to NAFTA, and on the east, a response to the breakup of the Soviet Union. Now, that was great as long as the world was going well. Now, they have to decide, are they willing to become a political entity? They have become an economic entity, then economic union. Then the issue arises, what is a political entity? Let's take India. It will be easier to understand if we take India. Take India. India, Bihar doesn't grow. Maharashtra grows very well. What's the problem? Because the people at the center will be elected by both. So if the people from Bihar, there are more voters in Bihar than Maharashtra, then they'll say, look, either you do something for us, or we'll bring the whole system down. Now here they're trying economics to keep Spain out, to keep Spain back. But are they actually going to allow integration of the EU? So this is a very serious question. The reason why it's serious is because the survival of EU as an entity is in long-term doubt. And it depends, but the failure also is in doubt, because giving up the euro and going back to a system is a huge transaction cost. So I think it's a serious issue.
Dr. Desai, one of the big problems because of the crisis is that of unemployment. There's 12% unemployment in Europe today, and there are parts of Europe, in southern Europe, where unemployment is so high that they say that it's reached the same levels as during the Great Depression. So with so many people out of the job, how difficult would it be for European leaders to ensure that people continue to support spending cuts so that their finances are back in shape?
I don't think that there is much support among the people for spending cuts. The leaders are cutting spending because they all get together in Brussels, and the leaders of the more successful states tell the poor states, look, you are bankrupt.
Yeah.
You have such huge deficit. You should really be cutting your deficit. We won't give you any more money. And that's why poor Greece and poor Italy and so on are having to cut their deficits. But it is entirely counterproductive. It actually increases unemployment in precisely those countries where there is the highest unemployment.
So what kind of political challenges does it pose to those people who are forced to cut spending and still have to tackle unemployment?
Well, at some point, they will see that all these doles they are getting from the EU are not worth it, and they will start leaving the EU. I think the EU is doomed. I think it has to break up.
I would disagree there.
Yep.
I would say that despite all this, it's like what happens when two immovable objects collide. And one immovable object is EU as a political entity, which is very important. He will tell you about that. And the other is EU as an economic entity. Now, what is going to happen? Something will have to give way. Economics, the problem with economics is when the crisis comes, everything has to give way. Because money is money. It knows no nationalities, knows no loyalties. I think what they're going to decide, and that's where Germany's call is very important. Are they going to decide, is it worth going back to the pre-EU days? Because the cost of what Ashok is saying is very serious. It is not so simple as to say, okay, now we will just leave the EU. It's not that simple. Getting back to your old currency
I'm going to
system.
ask all of you that question, but let me go to Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. See, one of the consequences of these spending cuts is that it's had devastating consequences in the social sector. Health, for example. Health services are being rationed. People are being charged user fees in hospitals. The countries that have cut most public spending, they're seeing resurfacing of diseases which were never found in Europe. For example, in Greece, you have malaria, you have the Great Nile virus, you have dengue fever coming up. These consequences, how does one count them? This deteriorating welfare and health services across Europe, at that cost, are you going to keep EU together?
Well, that's why, in fact, it's not just the economic and financial crisis now. This is also, as they themselves have acknowledged, this has also become a social crisis. This has also become a political crisis. Why? Because now, with all the austerity measures, growth is not coming. And when the growth is not coming, then you also have, when one or two countries actually go out from, if there is any actually default in Greece or Cyprus, anywhere else, all the banking system, it's also going to have a serious problems. So your sovereign debt crisis has become your banking crisis. When you have a banking system is in problem, then you also have a growth crisis because the money is not available for them. And then the growth the money is not available, investment is not available even for growth. So you have a sovereign debt crisis, your banking crisis, and then you also have your growth crisis. And then when you have all these things together, you also have political and social crisis. Now, how do you really deal? That's actually the crucial question is. Now, in normal circumstances, as I said, countries can devaluate your currency. They can have all other simple policies. Maybe within 1 or 2 years, you come back to the certain kind of competitiveness. But that kind of option is not available for some countries. I mean within the Eurozone. So the only option for them is either somebody is going to bail them out, which in this case presently this is Germany. So either for the time, these kind of problems will keep occurring. Today it has happened in Cyprus, yesterday it happened in Greece, tomorrow it will happen somewhere else. So Germany will have to keep them bailing them out for some time. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. But this is also becoming a political, because if you see immediately after the Second World War, the whole Europe was deciding what to do about Germany. So for the next 10 years, it's Germany which is going to decide what to do about Europe.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a political question which Germany has to basically first answer. At the same time, the whole Europe is going to answer whether they are going to have that kind of role of Germany. I mean, at the moment, economically, yes, everybody wants money, so they will say, okay, let Germany dictate terms. But at the same time, the moment they pay money for this, they will also have all these policies which are coming from German policy makers today, which are creating all these kind of growth problems.
At this point, we need to take a break. We'll be back with this discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the consequences of the continuing European economic crisis. Dr. Desai, I'd like you to elaborate on what you were saying about the collapse, the possible collapse of, or the imminent collapse of EU. The managing director of IMF, David Lipton, has said that there's a risk that if you continue with these spending cuts, whole of Europe may spiral down economically. Do you agree with him?
No, I think Germany will continue to do well, and so probably, let's say, will Norway, possibly Britain. It's not true that the whole of Europe will collapse. And the reason for the success of these countries is the failure of the rest. Germany is doing so well by selling to all the other European countries and competing them out to the market. So some countries will continue to do better, and that is why EU can't be destroyed so easily, because it is in the interest of the successful countries.
Okay. Professor Pant, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I said that I don't think the solution is going to be found within Europe, because the world is integrated. And actually,
But even within Europe, isn't there a difference between North and South, as you yourself pointed out?
Certainly.
So spending cuts and higher taxes may be easier for countries of the North, which have seen better growth.
No doubt.
But in the southern countries of Europe, you would need government spending to boost growth.
Certainly. It's like any country. Yeah. It's like, as I gave the example of India. There's no way that some of the poorer states will survive without the northern states, other richer states subsidizing them through the tax system. We have the Finance Commission which does that. The European Commission is supposed to do it, doesn't do it. But that's not the issue. Question is, it is not going to be solved like this. It is going to be solved when the initial problem disappears. And that's the US. And I can tell you, in the next 3-4 years, the fastest recovery will take place in the US. Because the system is very resilient. They don't care if unemployment goes to 80%, but the system must survive. And the system will survive, they will resil, that's one. And the other will be, of course, the Asian countries. That is, of course, I can go on for hours on why it has to be the Asian century for simple demographic reasons. So this is where the recovery comes, not with this, temporarily moving things around between Germany. I don't think that's well socialized.
Well, Sachdeva, do you think that this continuing crisis in Europe actually threatens the democracy in Europe? Because all the solutions, as you yourself pointed out, the monetary solutions are European, and the local problems are essentially local, and you have no fiscal tools available to deal with them. Devaluating your currency or doing whatever to become competitive.
I don't think it's really a threat to democracy in Europe, but obviously there is a possibility of more right-wing political parties coming to power in Europe. But overall, what you can see, it's not really danger to EU per se, because the EU is not going to collapse so easily, but there is a serious possibility that the Eurozone may break up. Yep. I mean, you might have 2 or 3 countries going out of Eurozone, or you might have the possibilities of 2 Euros. One is dominated by Germany and others, all the peripheral countries. But at the same time, many others are also arguing, because in the last 20 years, actually Europe had only 2 major projects. First, it happened the enlargement in the 90s. Then you had the introduction of Euro. After that, Europe was out of agenda. You had Lisbon Treaty, but that was more or less consolidation of whatever they were doing. But now this crisis, I mean, if you look at the positive side, this has also given them a new agenda for the next 10 years. Now all of them are talking about common euro bonds. They are talking about, some kind of fiscal coordination. They are also talking about, so many other certain level political, kind of, integration. So, if they actually, if they are able to sustain this crisis, come out of this crisis in the next 1 or 2 years, 3 years, come out in the sense not that, growth will come out immediately in Europe, but at least there's no Eurozone breakup, something as they are able to bail them out, few countries, then they'll be talking about new agendas for the next 10 years.
Look, they said, do you think the Eurozone needs to be protected? Or can it be restructured? If the Eurozone collapses, what consequences does it have for those countries which have invested in the debt of Eurozone countries? Might it not lead to a bigger crisis if the Eurozone collapses?
Originally, the Eurozone was a trade bloc in which they abolished customs duties and they unified the exchange rate. And what they need to do first of all is to disunify it. That is, let every country have its own currency and let them float. That will give them some protection against competition from abroad. This is the simplest thing to do without changing the entire political structure and so on.
So do away with the euro. Go back to the drachma and the French franc and the Deutschmark. Is it? That's a radical suggestion.
But the problem with that solution is that that assumes that, as Ashok is saying, economics dominates politics. But that's not true, because if you look at it, this breakup of the EU will happen only if Germany says the rest of you get out.
Not
the
break
reverse
up
will
of
not
the EU.
happen.
He's talking of break up of the Eurozone.
But if you break up the Eurozone, that's the break up of the EU. What's left? After all, you think India is, SARC is, is only India.
But Eurozone is actually just part of the economic and monetary union.
Most
It means the
important-
breaking of the, there's only one stage is single currency.
Dr. Desai,
But
what
then
do
you
you
also
say?
have to
See,
renegotiate.
these two are ranged against
all
you.
the prime ministers
Yeah.
can continue to go to Brussels every Friday and have great parties over the weekend. They can continue to talk about everything else. EU can survive forever.
Who will pay for that party? That's the point I made.
They can have a small tax, let's say 0.1%.
Let me go on to
Yeah.
another subject,
Okay,
which is
okay.
the consequences for India.
Right.
Now, you are a trade person.
Right.
So how has the Eurozone crisis impacted India? Because it's
Very
our
limited.
largest trade
Very
partner, largest source of foreign investment, and also a largest destination for outward investment from India.
Right. Now, on the largest destination, actually the country is UK, not EU. That's our largest destination. On trade, let me tell you the facts. This is a fact. Between 1995 and 2007, India's trade is now shifted progressively away from the developed countries, including the EU. Now, EU is very crucial now for garments. But garments is losing a focus area in the Asian countries. You will see we are the only ones still, apart from small countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, who are still into garments. So I see progressively major reduction in the share of India's trade going to this. There is this decoupling which a lot of people don't think is happening. But look at the data. Our largest trading partners are now in Africa and the East Asian countries. They are not the US. US is a very small trading partner. EU is the largest. But EU, if you take away Germany, that's it. So if you look at the micros and you take away Germany and UK, the impact trade-wise in India is extremely limited, and that is why the EU is pushing for the FTA. And that's why I've always claimed that I don't see why we are getting so excited about the FTA. There's nothing in it as a trade agreement. Let's talk about services.
Do you agree with him? Because a lot of parties in India, I mean, FTA agreement talks have been going on since 2007.
That's right.
And last month, when the Prime Minister went to Germany, again there was a hope that FTA would be signed. In India, the CPM and the BJP have been vociferously opposing it. But let me put it to you that suppose we sign FTA and it's good for Germany and good for Europe, then it's good for resolving the European crisis. And maybe we'll also benefit by helping resolve the European crisis because we also get market access.
Well, I don't think signing India-EU FTA is going to resolve Euro crisis.
No, at least contribute to it, no?
Well, I mean, no, we are too small actually in that sense for Europe. But I mean, I partially agree with Professor Pant. I mean, yes, I mean, the importance of Europe is actually declining over years. I mean, if you look at our trade share with Europe, it was 26-27% just 14 years back. Now it's just about 15-16%. But for certain kind of commodities, Europe is a very important market. At the same time, even for certain kind of investment which we are getting from Europe, these are very, very crucial because 50%, more than 50% technical and financial collaboration of our companies are with Europe. So what is happening in Europe is going to be important. And if there is no growth in Europe, we will have certain negative implications immediately for us. But what was happening for the last 2 years, why it didn't impact us so, significantly? Because Germany was doing very well. So last year, in 2011-12, the figures of our trade was about 110 billion, which was growing. But this year's, 12-13 figures I have seen about for first 9 months, it's about 75 billion. It means this year, trade actually may come down because Germany is not doing well. So if the major economies in Europe are doing well, particularly UK and Germany, it's okay. But otherwise, if there is any problem, but that growth of Germany is also to some extent is also linked with what is happening overall Europe.
Okay,
so it's going to have impact.
We
on
got
us,
to wrap up now. So let me begin with you, Dr. Desai. You've been Chief Economic Advisor to Government of India. Now suppose you were Chief Economic Advisor to EU. What are the 3 things you would ask them to do?
First of all, reintroduce national currencies. Secondly, invest in innovation and invest in industrial innovation. Exactly what Germany has done. Germany has been extremely successful.
Okay.
And this success should really be spread
Number
to
3.
the rest of Europe.
Number 3?
And number 3, just stop worrying about the fiscal deficit. It is not the solution.
Okay, Dr. Pant.
Very simple. Either you adopt a system of rewarding success and punishing failure, which you don't have, or ask France to leave the Union.
Okay, Dr.
No, I think
Sachdeva.
the sensible thing to look at Europe would be, be prepared for Euro breakup, and at the same time preparing yourself for implications of that breakup for Europe and for your economy and politics.
Okay, so thank you very much for coming and giving these suggestions. I hope the EU is listening, but I'm sure our viewers are listening. I hope we'll have you here again soon. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye.